Hi, I'm John Cullen. In this episode of Crash Course, I'm going to take a look at root cause analysis and share with you what the basics are. What do you need to know about root cause analysis? What are the simplest elements that can get you 80% of the way there? If there were a crash course in root cause analysis, what might that look like? And that's going to be the focus of this episode of Crash Course with John Cullen. Thanks for joining. Let's get started.
How you like me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? Well, how you like me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? Well, how you like me now? Remember the time, hey, when I eat you up. You know, yeah, I was alive. Oh, baby, must know the kind of line I mean. Hey, so if I was to cheat, oh Lord, would you see right through me?
All right, so in this episode of Crash Course, we're going to dig into root cause analysis. What do you need to know in order to be able to understand it and to use root cause analysis effectively? Can we cover what root cause analysis is in a fairly short amount of time? We're going to explore, is it safe for teachers to teach? And we're going to use root cause analysis to get a better understanding of this scenario. So this is the case study that we're going to use in this show. Now, root cause analysis is used in manufacturing, it's used in production, it's used in all kinds of IT management to get to the heart of a problem if a system isn't working. Recently in Texas, their power grid almost went out. And the question would be, well, can we figure out what was the root cause of that? And how do you do that? And there are a number of different techniques, but the focus of Crash Course is to see if we can focus on what do you need to know to get 80% of the benefit. All right, so could we quickly wrap this thing up in a way that you could say, oh, okay, I kind of get it, and there's a simple way to proceed that'll get you at least 80% of the way there in any given scenario, and I believe there is. So what I'm going to do in this episode is simplify what root cause analysis is, and we're going to take a closer look at what you need to know in order to get 80% of that benefit. And we're going to apply this to, is it safe for teachers to teach? And if it's not, why not? Right? What are we afraid might happen? Okay, now I've got some video queued up that we're going to take a look at in a minute with Chris Wallace from, I guess it's Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace or something. And he's interviewing Dr. Rochelle Walensky from the CDC. And we're going to apply the root cause analysis concepts to that interview in just a moment. But the question is, and Chris, this is the nature of this interview with Dr. Rochelle Walensky, is it safe for teachers to teach? And if not, why not? What are we afraid might happen? Well, if I were to apply root cause analysis to this teacher scenario, the questions I would start to ask are, the schools are closed, why? Government officials are hesitant to reopen schools, why? Why is that? And we're trying to zero in on the root cause of these issues. And how do we find the answers to these questions? All right, so I just showed you a whole bunch of complicated stuff. Can we net it down to something real simple that we can find the answers very, very quickly? And the answer to that is, I think we can. So let me show you what I do in order to very quickly kind of get to the essence of a problem. And the answer is, if you act like a 3-year-old, you're going to find that it's incredibly simple. Now, you'll probably alienate people, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that you get to the root cause. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. When it comes to root cause analysis, 3-year-olds are the Jedi Masters. 3-year-olds have absolutely mastered the art of root cause analysis. They just don't know it. And what's funny about it is that their parents frequently get annoyed. And once you study this stuff and you realize what's going on here, it's fascinating. And here we find out that 3-year-olds are Jedi Masters of root cause analysis. It's like, well, how did that happen? It's built in. It's built into the human nature. So the kids don't know it, but if you ask anybody who knows root cause analysis and they, give me a 3-year-old and I can take an hour off of the first interviews. I'm going to show you why. What do 3-year-olds do? Step 1. You need to know the 5 whys. And what do 3-year-olds do? Why? That is at the heart of root cause analysis. And what we're going to do is apply this incredibly simple method to a rather complex scenario using the Harvard Business School case method. So we're going to apply this technique to the interview between Chris Wallace and Dr. Rochelle Walensky that took place on Sunday, I guess it was February 14th or something. And I'm going to play that video for you, and we're going to apply the 5 whys to that dialogue and see if Chris Wallace had done that. Might we have had a more meaningful conversation with Dr. Rochelle Walensky? So let's take a look. The magic phrase to stop kids from asking why 70 million times a day. Don't stop your kids from asking why. Appreciate it and ask yourself, why don't you know the answers to their questions? And maybe you should look them up. So let's go back to the basic premise. Schools are closed. Why? Government officials are hesitant to reopen schools. Why? What is it that everybody's afraid of? Is it COVID-19? Okay. But it's because COVID-19 does what? All right, let's take a look at Dr. Rochelle Walensky in the interview with Chris Wallace. And we're going to break it down, and we're going to apply the root cause analysis technique of why, and continue to see if we can peel to the essence of what the problem is and what the issues are using root cause analysis. So let's run this video, and let's see what you guys think.
Do you think that by the end of this year, you and I will be able to walk down the street without a mask?
I think that very much but depends on how we behave right now. I think we need to do, all of us need to do our part. If we have another surge because we are not taking the proper mitigation strategies, I think it would be foolish for me to project.
One day a week.
Backpedaling from the Biden administration and pushback from frustrated parents, students, and lawmakers who say 1 day a week is not enough, while some teachers' unions oppose any return to the classroom.
The school district is hell-bent on forcing thousands of educators into unsafe buildings.
We'll ask CDC Director Rochelle Walensky if the agency's new guidelines will speed up school reopenings. President, you talk about science. President Biden, since the campaign, has talked about we're going to follow the science. But 11 days ago, you were speaking at a formal briefing, and you said that teachers do not have to be vaccinated for schools to reopen. And after you said that, the White House said, not so fast. Take a look.
All right, so the essence here is, what is the worst thing that happens if we don't do this, right? So if we don't do this thing, what's the worst thing that happens?
Doctor?
Safe reopening does not suggest that teachers need to be vaccinated in order to reopen safely.
Dr. Walensky spoke to this in her personal capacity. Obviously, she's the head of the CDC, but we're going to wait for the final guidance to come out.
But when it comes to affecting people's daily lives, the real news was the CDC issuing updated guidelines for getting the nation's students back to school quickly and safely. That includes mask wearing, distancing, hand washing, and cleaning.
Why is that? Why do we need distancing and hand washing and cleaning? What's the worst thing that happens if we don't clean and we don't do all those things? What's going to happen?
But not necessarily vaccinations for teachers, as well as a color-coded guide to help school districts decide under what conditions they can offer in-person instruction. The phased approach based on community spread corresponds to either full in-person, hybrid, reduced attendance, or virtual-only instruction. And joining us now, the Senate Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
All of that stuff that Chris Wallace just talked about is to mitigate what? And the simple answer is to mitigate coronavirus, to mitigate COVID-19. But we have to, why? What is it about coronavirus that we are so fearful of people getting it? What is it about it? Is it the fever? Is it the congestion, the cough? Or is it that it kills people? I believe the root cause of the problem here is this belief that coronavirus kills everybody that contracts it. Clearly, it doesn't do that, right? Everybody who contracts coronavirus does not die. But it is deadly. It's a deadly disease, and people are dying from coronavirus. So now it's important to figure out the distinction between who is dying most and who is dying the least from coronavirus. And if there are particular groups, who are they? And if there are particular co-infections or comorbidities that are particularly lethal, like Alzheimer's, we know that people with Alzheimer's that contract COVID it's a really deadly combination, and the data bears that out. That's how we know that. So similarly, we want to look at the data and see what does the data bear out. So the questions that we're asking here in this interview that we're overlaying on top of Chris Wallace and Rochelle Walensky's conversation have to do with why. Why do we need to do these things? And is it to prevent the children from dying? Is it to prevent the teachers from dying? That should be sort of the litmus test here. Is that the root cause of all of this activity, is to prevent the children from dying, to prevent the teachers from dying? Because if people are just going to get sick with a fever and the congestion and coughing and headaches, we can bear that. It's the dying part that is the big problem. So if all this activity is to prevent children and teachers from dying, let's make sure we're clear on that. All right, so let's go through this interview and see what Dr. Walensky has to say to Chris Wallace. I'll back it up here for you just a touch. Here we go.
Districts decide under what conditions they can offer in-person instruction. The phased approach based on community spread corresponds to either full in-person, hybrid, reduced attendance, or virtual-only instruction. And joining us now, the Senate Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. Rochelle Walensky. Doctor, as I understand these new CDC guidelines, if you have proper mitigation in place, even in communities with high transmission, some students can go back to school at least some of the time for in-person instruction. Is that correct?
Good morning. Good to be back with you. In fact, that is correct. So even in the areas of the highest community spread, we are advocating with the strict mitigation measures that you described, including universal and mandatory masking, as well as 6 foot of distancing, that at least our K to 5 children should be able to get back to school, at least in a hybrid mode.
What makes you think that K to 5 is safe and the kids older than that are not? Why would you think that? She talks about universal and mandatory masking. Why is that necessary? Is there evidence that that makes a difference? Is that what works so well in Shanghai, where they have less than 10 people dead? Was it universal masking, right? Is that what works so well in Vietnam, was universal mandatory masking? Is that why there's less than 40 people dead in Vietnam?
So, given that, Doctor, is there any scientific reason why, for instance, the 52,000 public school students in San Francisco have been shut out of school for 11 months now, since last March?
So why were the kids shut out of school? In order to prevent what? Kids from dying, teachers from dying, right? How many kids that age have died of COVID since the outbreak in the United States? What are the other causes of death that are greater threats to kids than COVID, Dr. Walensky? Are there greater threats?
It's a great question. What we have tried to do with this new guidance is to take the extensive literature that has occurred from September through now, where we've had experiences from other schools, from the other countries.
So what are the countries? What other countries are you talking about, Dr. Walensky? You're talking to other countries?
To see what the science says and how we can do so safely.
All right, so what does safely mean? How do we define safely? And what would unsafe look like? What would constitute success? What would constitute failure? How do you define open schools safely? Does that mean we open the school and no kids die? And what would an unsafe opening look like?
It's not just that we need to include these mitigation measures, but they're hard to do.
They're hard to do. So which ones in particular are difficult to do? What makes them so hard? And what would be the worst thing that would happen if we didn't do them at all? Would kids just start dying if we didn't do all these things? Is that what her supposition is that if we don't do these things?
So some of them suggest, for example, diagnostic testing.
Diagnostic testing? If there's no therapeutic treatment from the WHO for children, from the FDA, what are we testing them for? We have nothing to give them if they're positive. If they test positive, there's no medicine. Not for kids. So is the goal to test the children so that we can track them because they don't have iPhones? Is that the idea? Right? Because if we have no medicine to give them, the only reason to test the kids would be to know who's sick and who's not, right?
Diagnostic testing and contact tracing within 48 hours of a contact to ensure that people can be properly isolated and quarantined.
I see. So isolated and quarantined and left to die because you have no medicine for anybody. So you're going to isolate and quarantine the sick, but you have no medicine to give them.
So really it's a layered mitigation approach, and what we've put forward in this guidance is the roadmap to get us there.
So you have a roadmap.
But to just press on this issue, given your CDC guidelines, if you have proper mitigation in place, is there any reason why a public school district needs to shut down for the better part of a year?
So why did they shut down in the first place? What are they trying to mitigate? Kids dying? Teachers dying?
So we need to make sure that the K-5 schools and the density is down and...
So when she talks about density, why do we need to make sure the density is down in K-5 Is that what they did in Myanmar? Is that what they did in Mongolia? Is that what worked so well there? Was they got their density down in K-5 and you called Myanmar and they said that's it?
Part of the reason they haven't been able to open is because we hadn't previously had the science in order to inform how to open safely.
So what is the difference between opening safely and not opening safely? And then how would we measure that? How do you measure this school opened really safely and this school did not?
We didn't have the data, and prior.
So you didn't have what data, and what would you like to know from the data? So what data did you not have that you wish you had, and what questions do you need answered, Doctor?
We didn't have any guidance as to how to do it safely. So
you didn't have any guidance on how to do it safely, but now you do have this guidance? This guidance is now ready? That would be my question if I was Chris Wallace.
We are really anticipating that with this guidance emerging, that schools will be able to start opening.
So when you say anticipating guidance emerging, you mean you still don't have the guidance. So almost a year into this and you don't have the guidance, although I believe you got $68 billion, but the guidance isn't ready.
President, you talk about science. President Biden, since the campaign, has talked about we're going to follow the science. But 11 days ago, you were speaking at a formal briefing, and you said that teachers do not have to be vaccinated for schools to reopen. And after you said that, the White House said, not so fast. Take a look, Doctor.
Safe reopening does not suggest that teachers need to be vaccinated in order to reopen safely.
Dr. Walensky spoke to this in her personal capacity. Obviously, she's the head of the CDC, but we're going to wait for the final guidance to come out.
When you're speaking in public, since you took this role and you were speaking there as a CDC director, are you ever speaking in your personal capacity? And is it clear now that when teachers' unions insist and continue to insist that all teachers, all staff must be vaccinated before any schools can reopen, that that's not based on science?
So why would teachers feel this way? Why would teachers want to have the vaccination? What are they afraid of? What might happen? What's the worst thing? And does every teacher in America want it?
You know, here's what I will say. My goal is to make sure that the guidance got out. The guidance has gotten out, and it was released on Friday. And the guidance does specifically say that there are many mitigation strategies that are layered mitigation strategies that are necessary to reopen. There are also additional mitigation strategies such as teacher vaccination. That's what our school guidance says. Our other guidance on who should be vaccinated, our advisory committee on immunization practices, suggests that teachers should be prioritized in the 1B group.
So now why is this? Why are all teachers prioritized regardless of age or sex? There may be legitimate answers to these questions. For example, we want to immunize the teachers regardless of sex or age, not to mitigate their deaths, but the spread from family to family via teacher. That would be a reasonable explanation that I could buy.
Is the group with greater than 75-year-olds. So I am a big advocate of ensuring that the ACIP guidance is followed, that teachers are prioritized. But from a scientific standpoint, we know that it's possible to reopen schools safely without all of the teachers being vaccinated.
During the campaign, the president set a goal for what he wanted to accomplish in the first 100 days in terms of reopening schools, but the White House backpedaled on that this past week. Take a look at this, Doctor.
My team will work to see that a majority of our schools can be open by the end of my first 100 days.
Well, teaching at least one day a week in the majority of schools by day 100.
But according to a national study, 64.8% of students K through 12 are already attending schools that are open at least one day a week. So, Doctor, aren't we already meeting the goal that President Biden has set for the nation to meet by next April? Aren't we already meeting that goal?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that we know that the less community spread of this disease that's out there, the more children will be able to get back to schools.
All right, so why is that? What is the correlation between community spread and children getting back to school? Can you explain that further, please, Doctor? Help us understand that.
So we know that as our numbers come down, if we continue, each of us as individuals continue to follow these mitigation strategies to get the spread of disease down in the communities, we will have more and more children back to school.
So again, why? What is the correlation between community spread and children getting back to school?
The guidance that we released on Friday is the roadmap to get there, to follow how much disease is in the community and how much our kids can safely be back in school. And so if everybody is doing their part to decrease disease in the community, we'll have more children back.
So you've talked repeatedly here about mitigation, and your guidelines depend on schools spending money to make the environment inside the classroom, inside the building, more safe. But I want to put this up on the screen. As part of his COVID relief plan, the president wants $130 billion for those improvements to schools. But having said that, Congress has already approved $68 billion, and so far school districts have only spent $4 billion of that $68 billion. Isn't the $64 billion that's still in the pipeline enough money, maybe not to solve all the problems, but to get a lot more kids back to school?
Why? So what is this money being used for? What would happen if we didn't allocate it? What would the worst case scenario be?
You know, these schools need space.
How much space do they need, Doctor? What will the space cost? How will this space be used specifically?
They need to de-densify their classrooms. They need
the old de-densifying of the classroom trick. Where's this been a success? Beijing, Shanghai, they did the de-densification of the classrooms over there.
Need staffing. They need nurses.
Nurses. What are the nurses going to do if there's no therapeutic treatment? What jobs will these nurses be doing? So we're going to hire a whole bunch of nurses. And what will they be paid per year?
Another layer of mitigation would be school screening to keep.
This is my favorite, school screening. What does that look like, a school screening? Do we have a school screening checklist?
Folks safe even after vaccination.
Okay, so how does school screening keep folks safe after vaccination? I'm really interested in that.
I think we need a lot more resources in order to get the schools safe.
Okay, so what does get the schools safe mean? Are the schools unsafe today? How would you know that? How did you measure that? What is the difference between a safe school and an unsafe school? And does this involve Lysol and Reckitt Benckiser? I don't know. I mean, what do you do to a school to make it safe? And are they all unsafe right now? What do we need to do to get an unsafe school safe? How long does that take? Does that take 1 day, 2 days, 5 days? How many people per school? And what exactly are they doing in the school to make it safe?
One of the things that's really been emphasized in the school reopening is how unsafe some of our school ventilation systems are.
So the school ventilation systems are unsafe. So this seems like this is a problem that's, regardless of COVID, we've got ventilation problems. Now, if you remember, what was it, Legionnaire's disease, that Dr. Cyril Wecht was the one that figured out what was going on, and that was a ventilation problem.
That's a problem not just for SARS-CoV-2, but for other respiratory viruses, for children with asthma, for exposure to mold. So I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do.
All right, so it's interesting that she mentions asthma because more kids died from asthma in 2020 than coronavirus. So are we curing for asthma? We're curing for coronavirus. How many school-aged kids have died from asthma versus COVID-19 in 2020? Dr. Walensky.
What I worry about is the vaccine hesitancy.
Why would you worry about that? Why would you worry what might happen if people don't take the vaccine? What's the worst thing that happens?
So once we have enough vaccine, at some point we're going to have more vaccine than people want it.
Why? Why do you think that's a problem? It sounds like typical supply and demand stuff to me. You've got more vaccine than people want. So what? Big deal.
And we very much need to make sure that everybody rolls up their sleeves when it's turn and when they're eligible.
Now, why is that important? What would happen if not so many people got the vaccine? We won't achieve herd immunity. We won't achieve depletion of susceptibles. Why does everybody have to get vaccinated?
And much of the hard work that we're doing now is to ensure that we can inform all of those who might be hesitant now as to the reasons why it's safe and why it's effective.
Safe and effective of what? How do you know it's safe? If it didn't, it's not FDA approved, doctor, you know that. So people want to get the vaccine because it prevents what? What is it that the vaccine prevents? Coronavirus or death?
Do you think that by the end of this year, you and I will be able to walk down the street without a mask?
I think that very much depends on how we behave right now. I think we need to do, all of us need to do our part. If we have another surge because we are not taking the proper mitigation strategies, I think it would be foolish for me to project.
Dr. Walensky, thank you. Thanks for your time this weekend, and we'll stay on top of those schools opening back up. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that's Chris Wallace's interview with Rochelle Walensky, Dr. Rochelle Walensky. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of Crash Course. The essence of this is it safe for teachers to teach? And if not, why not? What are we afraid might happen? I'm John Cullen. Thanks for joining Crash Course.
Now there was a time when you loved me so. I couldn't do wrong, but now you need to know. See, I've been a bad man, and I'm indeed. I found a brand new love for this man, and I can't wait till you see. I can't wait. So how you like me now? 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 Well, how you like me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? Well, how you like me now? Remember the time, hey, when I eat you up. You know, yeah, I was alive. Oh, baby, must know the kind of line I mean. Hey, so if I was to cheat, oh no, would you see right through me? I know. If I sing a sad song, would you give it to me? I know, baby. Hey, so how you got me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? But how you like me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? Well, how you like me now? Is that to make you love me, baby?